If your goal is to get financial freedom, well, you need to start earning more. And the best way to earn more is to... There are countless videos going viral at the minute about how once you hit 100k, your net worth goes crazy, and how making your first 100,000 is difficult, and after that, it just becomes easy. And as a software engineer, I think that number can sound quite intimidating, because especially when you're spending time on YouTube and you're seeing that some people just make that much in a year, and you might be on the average salary, which is a quarter as much, and that's before taxes and bills and everything else. Saving 100,000 is completely different to earning 100,000. But people are clearly doing it, so what are they doing differently? Well, before I show you what you can start doing, let's have a look at why 100,000 is actually a pretty interesting milestone. Well, you're going to hear the word financial independence, and 100k isn't exactly going to mean that you can quit your job and never work another day in your life, but what it is going to do is that if you can achieve it while you're still fairly young, it's definitely going to give you some stability that other people just don't have. I'll give you an example. So the S&P 500 typically returns about 10% a year. So say you're in your mid-20s and you make it, you get your 100,000 and you throw it in the S&P 500. You don't spend it on some ridiculous car. Well, even if you do nothing else and you just leave that in the S&P 500, by the time you retire, that's going to be 5 million, which is going to be more than enough for you to live off of. So at the very least, it means that you no longer have to worry about what you're going to do past your 60s, which for a lot of people, it looks like not having a good quality of life, struggling to afford food, struggling to afford heat in the winter. You don't have to worry about that anymore because you've done it. You've set the money aside, it's going to accumulate. But it's not like that money's just locked away. If it's in an account where you can access it, whether it's your Roth IRA or in the UK it's in a stocks and shares ISA, it's something that you can withdraw from. And not only do you have that peace of mind of, okay, you know what, when I'm older, I'm going to be set. That money set aside, it's doing the work for me. It also means that when your boss makes your life impossible and work just becomes this awful thing that you can't bear to get out of bed in the morning for, well, guess what? You can get up and leave because, I mean, worst case scenario, you can afford rent for far longer than it's going to take you to find another job. Or maybe you want to take a risk. Maybe you want to move countries because you've heard that life is better and cheaper in Costa Rica or Thailand or wherever it is. Well, if it doesn't work out, you've got the money to fall back on. And having this freedom to maybe just go traveling for a couple of years in your 30s, or take a couple of months off to pursue something new, like a SaaS product, or maybe you want to become a full-time content creator, 100k is going to get you there. So how do we actually get there? What do we do? What are the steps? For some of you, this is going to be a couple of steps backwards, but it's important to make sure you actually have the foundation. But before we talk about that, software engineer mentors cost about $66 for just a 45-minute session. I mean, look at this guy. He costs $81. Most of you guys know how to code anyway and do it day in, day out for work, so they probably don't even apply to you, but if you're interested in fast-tracking your career and salary, or you want to start building alternative streams of income with the skills you already have, like this guy who makes $96,000 a year, literally just talking to a camera about what he did that day at work, or this guy who's making $83,000 a month from the SaaS he launched, I can help you start moving towards that. So I've thrown 5 sessions on a Saturday that you can book, and I'm only charging $50. It's the only time I could spare, so once they're gone, they're gone. If you're interested, link in the description. Make sure you actually are good at what you're doing. Regardless of what language it is, regardless of what sector you're in, make sure you're actually getting good at that thing. Because fundamentally, the sell here is how you're going to get there as a software engineer. And that's not as an amateur software engineer or as somebody who's barely managing to hold down a job. You need to be a competent software engineer because it's going to set you up to start scaling your wealth far better than somebody who has no clue what they're doing. Now, if you're the kind of person that's clicked on this video, you're probably the kind of person who has worked hard and is willing to learn new things and become better. So I'm going to assume that you are a competent software engineer. You need to keep that feeling of wanting to learn and wanting to expand because fundamentally the software engineering path is really good financially. Like if you look at average pay for software engineers in all nations, it's well above the average, right? So at the very least, you're going to be well off. You're not doing bad. But that's not to say that you're going to hit that 100k anytime soon. Now, I had another video where I talked about this, but one of the first things that you want to do is whatever escape path you're going to pick, it's probably going to require some initial investment. And that's much easier to do when, you know, you've got a high salary and you're not living paycheck to paycheck. And in another video, I covered the software engineering advantage and the fact that, yes, we're going through tech layoffs at the minute, but actually you're in a job where as long as you have the skill set, you can just pick a sector that's exploding. And if you're not currently doing that and you're not taking a look around and thinking, is this the kind of job where my salary is going to explode in the next 5 years? Then ask yourself, is that the place for you? If your goal is to get financial freedom, well, you need to start earning more. And the best way to earn more is to be in the places where they can actually pay you more and are willing to promote you and nurture your career so that you can get there faster. So once you've actually built a strong foundation and you feel that you're a pretty competent software engineer, start looking for high-paying specializations. And that's not just about looking at, okay, this particular tech stack does well, which is part of it, sure, but it's also looking at what particular industries are doing well at the minute. If you go on a job hunting site and you notice that most jobs are paying 50 to 80k a year, but then there's one particular industry, probably AI startups at the minute, that pays between, 80 to 150,000 a year. What's on those job ads? What skills are you missing? If you already have 5 of those skills and they're listing 6 and there's 1 that you're missing, that's what you should be doing in your evenings. You should be pushing out some personal projects that demonstrate that you're able to do that skill that you can't otherwise say, oh, I did that at work. And you should be applying for those jobs. And make sure when you go for that job, the initial pay that you negotiate is as high as you can get. Because the problem is that people who never bother with negotiation, which as a software engineer, maybe you never have, you could be the best software engineer in the world, but if a company can get away with paying you what you're happy to be paid, they will. Because even if it's 20 grand less than they're willing to pay, their incentive is just to make you happy enough to keep working within their price range, right? And if you come in way too low, why would they say no to you? Getting good at negotiation is one of the most important things for your career, because you're not pushing for that progression and you don't know how to communicate your value, you're not going anywhere. One of the best things that I've found that you can do for this, and I actually have a video on it, but I'll summarize quickly. ChatGPT voice mode. Just tell it, copy paste into it the job description and say, interview me, and speak to it and ask it for feedback as you go. And if you don't think that it's hardballing you enough or you feel quite comfortable, ask it to be a more difficult interviewer. Ask it for salary negotiations. And then each time that you successfully negotiate higher, ask it to be more difficult. And then when you fail, say, what could I do better? And just these repetitions of doing that means that when you have that very important first conversation, which is your initial or your starting salary, or even when you're going for a pay rise, you're more competent and you're going to get what you're worth. And you're not going to be the person at the bar surrounded by your mates who are in software engineering and hearing the stories about how every couple of years they seem to massively increase their income, while you're thinking, wow, I work just as hard as them, if not harder. Why am I not seeing that improvement? It's probably because you're not putting the time and effort into negotiating your salary. Now, once you've got that good salary and the net worth is starting to increase because presumably you can continue living on however much you were already living on, and now you've got this massive income, start putting that money away. And let's start thinking about, okay, how can we seriously start increasing that net worth? Now, I talk about this in my mentoring, and I don't believe that you can get to these steps before you've at least become successful as a software engineer. I think the barrier to entry here is you need some experience behind you to promote the kind of ideas that will be successful. There will be exceptions to this rule, and you definitely will be able to go on YouTube and find people who have built their first SaaS product and it happens to go mega viral. But I think if you actually look at the majority rather than the minority, they're people who have become very, very good at their craft and then have gone on to do new things. And this is going to appear like a fork in the road, but actually they work quite nicely together. We're going to talk about content creation and we're going to talk about building a saleable product. Let's start with content creation. There's a reason that you see so many software engineers talking about software engineering on YouTube. It's because they get paid. And if you look at breakdowns of how much people are paid for their YouTube content, normally they're not paid very much by YouTube. So why are they doing it? Well, it's not just about the direct income. It's about the authority that you build by having an audience. Because if you have an audience and people can see that, you're building trust. And rightly so. I mean, you're actually providing something to people. And the reason they're sticking around is because it's valuable to them. Not only is this going to make getting higher paid jobs easier, because you don't just have to say, trust me, here's a piece of paper. It's like, trust me, here's a few thousand people who rely on my information. But it's opening opportunities to things outside of software engineering. Whether you want to go more down the social route and actually start working with individuals in your community that are willing to pay to learn from you and grow with you. Or whether you notice that the majority of your audience has a particular problem, and if you can solve that problem and charge a reasonable price for it, then suddenly you've got free advertising to thousands of people. And that takes us on quite nicely to this dream of SaaS projects, right? What the people flexing their SaaS projects on social media don't tell you is that you can make the best SaaS project in the world, but if you get to the end and you finish it and you've sunk hundreds of hours in and you upload it, who's going to buy it? Congrats, you've made the best product in the world, but unless you can actually market it, your income's not going up at all. But if you can get the ball rolling on something like that, and you're only charging like $100 for something meaningful, in my mentoring ad, I talk about Mark Liu, who made like $100,000 a month. His product is only $200, but because he has thousands of people buying from it, that $200 very quickly becomes huge numbers. And the way that I want you to think about this is not to expect, oh, I'm going to make $100,000 a month, but if you could do 10% as well as him, you could add 10 grand a month onto your income. So not only are you making your salary, but you're making an extra 10 grand, which across 12 months, that's 120,000. You only have to be 10% as good as Mark Liu to start making that much money. Now, because of the nature of YouTube, I can't give you targeted advice on how to actually start progressing through this, but these are the general steps that you should be taking. Now, if that next step is, okay, I need to actually build that bigger salary because I'm a software engineer, I'm pretty good at what I do, it's just that, if I'm actually going to start earning more, I need to get that higher paid role. I actually have this video here where I talk about in detail how you can start getting way better at negotiating. I hope that video helps. Cheers.